Warning, war with Russia leads to the end of the dollar. Over the last several weeks, talks of war with Russia have continued to escalate. Will Russia invade Ukraine? If they do, will the U.S. go to war to protect Ukraine? Now, we can see the news is picking up stories, putting more Americans against Russia, blaming them for everything, including messing with the elections in the U.S., stoking the trucker protests in Canada, cyber hacking, and even being responsible for the sky-high inflation in Europe. So in this video, I'm going to break down how something very similar happened 40 years ago, how what was bad for peace was good for some stocks and investments if you knew what to do, and how regardless of the outcome of the war, the dollar is most likely to suffer, and what you need to be doing with your money to protect it and grow it during these volatile times. So let's go. Welcome back. If you are new to the channel, my name is Mark Moss, and I make these videos to change the way you think about money, because almost everything you've learned is wrong. Almost everything you hear and see is probably wrong, maybe misleading, if you don't have it in the greater context of what's going on, especially through a historical lens. So I do my best to bring this to you. Now, we're talking about changes, war, peace, and what's going to happen to the dollar. Now, there's good and bad in everything. Now, there's bad in peace is unfortunately affected. The markets will probably be affected. However, there's good where if you know how to navigate this, it could be good for your financial portfolio. Now, I'm going to run through what we're talking about. I do want to let you know that next week I am hosting a live event where I'm going to spend about an hour going through this in detail. The tectonic plates that are merging right now is going to create this cataclysmic event in the markets, and of course, most importantly, what you should be doing in your portfolio. There's a link down below if you want to join me. It's a free presentation. It'll be about an hour. I'll do a live question and answer so I can answer all your questions while we're there. But let's go ahead and just jump into it. So we're talking about war. War with Russia, war with Ukraine, war with the United States. What's going to happen? A direct combat attempt. Now, I just let you know through a historical lens that every time the markets are ready to crash, war seems to be the outcome. Check me out on that. But let's look at this. So right now we have Russia. Is it going to invade the Ukraine? It's been interesting. Over the last couple of days, we've seen mainstream media putting out stories that Russia will invade on Wednesday. Pretty sure when I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War, one of the things that he recommended was not to tell your enemy what day you invade them on. But anyway, that's what the mainstream is trying to tell us. Will they invade or not? We don't really know. I made a video about this before where I said I do believe they will invade. And the reason why is because the U.S. isn't probably going to do anything, maybe slap some sanctions, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. The big thing seems to be that Russia does not want Ukraine to get into NATO. They do not want that. They need this buffer zone. Now, should I care? Should you care about this? Do you really care anything about Ukraine? Joe Biden and his son Hunter certainly does. But do you or I care about Ukraine? Do you even know what's going on? I'm going to explain it to you. Do the Russians care? Well, for the Russians, it's an existential issue. They want a buffer zone. They do not want U.S. or NATO troops along their border, and they've made that abundantly clear, and that seems to be where the standoff. What about for the Americans? You and I, if we're Americans, do we care? Well, I certainly don't. What about the global elite? What about the industrial military complex? What about the warmongers? Let's take a look at that. Now, what we can see here, and again, this is seeding all over the news, we can see that the Ukraine crisis, there's no sign of a Russian de-escalation. No sign. So Russia's going full bore ahead, and it's on. But check out this I came across that I thought was pretty useful. For those that might be wondering, why does anybody care about Ukraine? We can see here, we see Ukraine is first in Europe in proven recoverable reserves of uranium. First in Europe in uranium. I'll say that again. You know we have energy crisis. I've been doing videos all about the energy crisis going throughout Europe, United States, and really the world. Uranium or nuclear is really the only way out of this. France is ahead of the curve. They're petitioning the EU to make it green energy. I think that's going to happen, and uranium is going to be a hot commodity. That's one of the positions you should be looking at in your portfolio. And so they're the first in Europe. We can see they're the second largest in iron ore reserves, pretty big. Third in Europe in shale gas. So energy in Europe is in a crisis. We've seen price of natural gas go up by over 10 times, over 1,000%. They're completely dependent on Russia for natural gas, and here we are. Third in all of Europe in natural gas reserves, fourth in the world in total value of natural resources. Of course, that's what every nation needs, natural resources. Seventh place in the world in coal reserves. We're still running on coal for electricity, and so that's important. There's massive shortages of coal in China. It's a hot commodity. We can see down here, this is all agricultural stuff. I'm not going to go through everything, but we can see here Ukraine can meet the food needs of 600 million people because of the agriculture, the type of soil they have, the arable land, the amount of sun, etc., what they're exporting. And then Ukraine is an industrialized economy, second in Europe for natural gas pipeline systems in the world. It's a pretty hot thing if you've been paying attention to what's going on with natural gas. Like I said, the crisis, Russia, the Nord Stream, etc. Ninth place in the world in exporting defense industry products, the warmongers, and 10th largest steel producer in the world. So Ukraine is actually pretty valuable for the world. So now you may understand why there is a fight over that. All right, now the good and the bad. Like I said, everything has good and bad to it. The good and the bad. The bad is that it's probably going to continue to be worse on the economy. Obviously, war is never good, in my opinion. I don't want boys and girls out there fighting. However, it could be good for stocks. It could be good for your portfolio if you know how to manage that. Specifically, energy and defense. I talked about uranium, natural gas, energy, and for defensive stocks. Now, what about the defensive stocks? I'm talking about, again, the industrial military complex. The defense stocks have been underperforming the entire market for 2020, 2021. Left behind by the tech stocks. The defense industry probably isn't too happy about that, and so maybe it's time to get those stocks going, if you know what I mean. We have talked about war in Ukraine, obviously war with China over Taiwan, war in Syria in the Middle East. It's all happening everywhere. So some names to put on your list: Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, and Leidos. I like Leidos. It's an intelligence contractor, and we can just see what's been happening. So you can see here Lockheed has been going down as the S&P has been going up. Our friends over the industrial military complex, I'm sure, are not very happy about this. And so what do? War. Well, let's look at this. So, but there's bigger implications of what could happen here. And I'm calling this the financial death penalty. So Russia has been threatened. And I put this in the other video where I talked about I think Russia will go ahead and at least move in a little bit because at the worst, the United States is probably just going to sanction them. Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. What do I mean by that? You know, limiting their financial transactions, limiting how much involvement they can have in the global financial system. We've been threatening Russia. We threaten all the countries with sanctions, as a matter of fact. And so, hey, Russia, if you invade, we are going to slap sanctions on you. We've been seeing that. Now, does that matter? Does it matter to Russia? Let's look at a couple things. So one, we can see here the nuclear option, they're calling it, would be if we removed Russia from the entire SWIFT system. So SWIFT is how, if you've ever sent a bank wire, there's a SWIFT code. That's how we move the money around globally through the SWIFT system. So if a nation is cut off from SWIFT, they're cut out of the global financial system. Or I should rather say, anybody in the global financial system that participates in SWIFT, which of course is most of the countries, but I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. So that would be the nuclear option, would be to cut them off of SWIFT altogether. However, does that really matter? So we can see with Russia, they have been living under sanctions for so long that they're kind of used to it. They've kind of figured out how to survive with sanctions slapped on them. We can see the cost of a Russian invasion in Ukraine, that the Biden administration is preparing possible sanctions ahead of a series of meetings with Moscow. But as we can see here with Putin, he's got a big gold bar in his hand. Russia has been stockpiling gold for a long, long time. Like I said, they've been living under sanctions for a long, long time. They've already been kicked out of the party. They've already learned how to live outside of the party. So how much would that affect them? We can see here that Putin backs crypto mining despite Bank of Russia's hard line. So the Bank of Russia is saying, hey, we shouldn't be in cryptocurrency. And Putin's like, hang on. I think we want to be in cryptocurrency. Why? It's outside the SWIFT system. Gold's outside the SWIFT system. Cryptocurrency's outside the SWIFT system. And Putin gets that. That's why he's backing up this crypto mining. He wants to have a piece of that. And really, it comes down to Russia or the US dollar. That's going to be the showdown. I'm going to show you that in a second. Now, there's historical precedence to this. As I said in the intro, about 40 years ago, we saw a similar situation setting up. The US dollar had a near-death experience. If we go back to 1979, we're kind of having a part two of that. So in 1979, there was something known as the Saturday Night Special. The Saturday Night Special is when this guy here, Paul Volcker, decided to take on inflation head on and jack up interest rates so high that he could basically kill inflation in its place. Now, back then it was extremely high. Today, it's unbelievable how high that was. We can see inflation in 1979 is put back to 13%. That was a good thing. The goods and services that cost $10 in 1967 cost $22.99 in December of 1979. So from $10 to $22.99. We saw major banks, Citibank and Bankers Trust of New York, had tested the waters with a lower 15% mortgage, and then it came back to 15.25% mortgage. We've been sitting around 3%. It just jacked up to about 4% the other day. Still crazy low compared to where it was back then at 15%. But what we can see is through that shock therapy where he shocked the markets and raised rates extremely high, what we saw is the US dollar share of global reserve currencies. So the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And the dollar share we can see up here till 1979, at the time of that Saturday Night Special, the shock, we were at about 85% share of global reserve currencies. However, it started dropping like a rock and plummeted all the way down here to just over 45% before coming back on board where the euro came on board and kind of where we are sitting today. Now I'm gonna come back to that in a minute, but basically what we can see is then in that Saturday night, then it became the Saturday Night Massacre, which is October 79. Paul Volcker Jr. called a rare evening press conference saying, hey, we gotta do something, we are going to raise rates. Now, after he did that, so about a month later, we went into the Iran hostage crisis. You might have heard about that. If you weren't alive, you might remember that. But the Iran hostage crisis was basically done in November, about a month later, 1979. Iranian students seized the embassy and detained more than 50 Americans. The Iranians held the American diplomats hostage for 444 days, over a year. It's a long time. The crisis dominated the headlines and news broadcasts and made the administration, wait for it, look weak and ineffective. That's the key piece here, right? So they messed with the money. It caused all types of instability throughout the world. The Iranians took Americans as hostage, but most importantly, the crisis dominated the headlines over a year, about a year and a half, and it made the administration look weak and ineffective. Carter's foreign policy team often seemed weak and vacillating. Kind of like the Biden administration. Weak and ineffective, vacillating, unable to get anything done. And then, about a month after that, because the entire world was breaking down, that wasn't enough. About a month later, we saw the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. We can see here that the invasion of Afghanistan was in December, the next month, 1979. The Soviet Union intervened in support of the Afghan communist government in its conflict with anti-communist Muslim guerrillas. And so that led to two conflicts back to back, but more importantly what happened is with inflation rates spiking sky high, the United States administration looking very weak on a global stage, of course, while it's having the dollar reserve, two wars breaking out, a Soviet invasion, the Iranian hostage, like I said, the United States looking impotent, couldn't control their money. What happened? Next thing you know, foreign investors start getting really worried. Like, hang on a second. After the Iranian invasion happened, this is a key point, after it happened, what did the United States do? They froze the accounts of the Iranians. They froze the accounts. They seized the money because remember, in the SWIFT banking system, the United States controls that. So when the Iranian hostage situation happened, they froze their money. And it left a lot of investors going, wait a minute, what if my money was in that bank? What would happen to my money? I'm not even involved in that, but my money was now locked up. Is the United States going to go around freezing bank accounts? And if so, then I probably don't want my money in an American bank or in a banking system that's under the control of the United States, which is pretty much every banking system in the world. So the foreign investors got very worried, which the next step happened, which is a dollar run. So these people said, wait a minute, the United States basically controls all these banks. I don't want to have my money in there where they can freeze it or seize it, so I should probably get it out. I should probably go put it into a Swiss bank. And that's exactly what they did, causing a massive flight to safety. People, investors, were ditching their dollars as fast as they could. And we saw the price of gold go from $300 right when Vulca did the Saturday night special and raised rates. Then we had the two crises happen. The United States started seizing bank accounts. And what happened? The price of gold went from $258 an ounce up to almost $800 an ounce in just about a year's time. Mortgage rates hit a high of 16%, which again, as of about 4% today, seems very extremely high. But the key piece is that they were ditching dollars as fast as they could. Why? Because they didn't want more disruption from the United States. They didn't trust the United States, and they didn't want the United States seizing their money. All right, so here we are. We have about the same situation setting back up. Will we have a repeat or nah? Well, let's take a look at this. So will we have another Volcker? Will there be another guy to rise up, take control of the Federal Reserve, and jack up rates to 16%? Do you think anybody in the United States, anybody in the financial industry or institutions has the backbone to do that? Do you think it's even feasibly possible? Well, I certainly don't. So I don't think that's possible. And just like we saw when Russia invaded Ukraine back in 2014, I think we're seeing the same thing. So what happened is when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, what did the US do? Oh yeah, that's right, sanctions. Same thing, right? Sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. That's what we have. We weaponize the US dollar. We weaponize the fact that we have the global reserve currency and we slap sanctions on them. That led to Russia saying, all right, fine. If you're going to keep doing sanctions against us, then we just won't hold any dollars. And guess what? If we don't hold dollars and we don't transact in dollars, then your sanctions don't do anything to us. And that's basically what they said. You can see here on the Wall Street Journal, Russia's wealth fund to ditch dollars amid U.S. sanctions threats. As a matter of fact, part of the drive to de-dollarize Russia's economy comes days before a summit. So about $600 billion, they were just, we'll just ditch it. We'll get out of the dollar. You have no control over us. We will hold gold instead. But it didn't end there. As a matter of fact, it's only escalated. We can see that Russia accelerates its de-dollarization move, so it's continued to get out of the dollar as fast as it can. And it's not just Russia doing that. As a matter of fact, it's a lot of Europe and, of course, our good friends over in China, President Xi. So Russia and China agreed to a 30-year natural gas pipeline to settle in euros outside the dollar. Now, this was just as of a few days ago, February 4th. This is all starting to happen really, really fast. Hopefully you're paying attention. Get out of the dollar. At least that's what Russia and China are doing, a $400 billion natural gas deal. So the pieces are all coming together to have a repeat of what's going on. So in 1979, as I said, we had about an 85% dollar share of the reserve currency, and it's now fallen to about 50, almost 60%. All right. But then more of the same is happening. So just like what happened in the Iranian hostage situation, the United States froze their money. And when they froze their money, people got spooked and didn't want to have their assets in a bank that could be frozen. We're seeing the same thing. So what we saw over the last couple of days is that good old President Biden has decided to steal, and I'm going to use the word steal, not just seize. He's decided to steal $7.5 billion from Afghanistan for what he calls humanitarian aid. So the United States froze $7.5 billion from the Afghanistan Central Bank. Now, if you live in Afghanistan and you keep your money in the bank, that means your money was frozen. No fault of your own. I guess it was your fault for keeping money in the bank. Who would have thought, right? Well, they've been petitioning the White House to let go of the money so that people can get their money. They're starving to death. Literally, the UN put out a report, 98% of people have food insecurity in Afghanistan right now. They have no money because the United States stole it. And now they decided to take half of it, $3.5 billion, and use it for humanitarian relief. however they decide they want to do that. The other half, $3.5 billion, they're going to give to 911 survivors and their family for compensation. How much? Who decides what they get? And why is it up to the Afghanistan people to pay that back? Those are all good questions that you should ask. Of course, we can see here on Yahoo News Voices, I was in Afghanistan, I met the people Biden is taking money from now. It's inhumane. He's taking their money. This isn't money taken from a terrorist organization. This is the people's money in the bank, and they took it. Same thing's happening in Canada right now. Canada, anybody who is involved in the Freedom Convoy, the truckers, is getting their bank accounts frozen. No due process, none of that, just frozen. So people are starting to wake up and go, wait a minute, why would I want to leave my money in the bank that the United States or any government, Canada, for example, would just take anytime they feel like it? And so the answer is they probably won't. So game on. So per this Fidelity report that came out with Fidelity, was written about El Salvador. So El Salvador was the first nation to adopt Bitcoin. And they said that there's a very high stakes, this is Fidelity talking, a very high stakes game theory at play here, whereby if Bitcoin adoption increases, the countries that secure some Bitcoin today will be better off competitively than their peers, the first mover advantage. Even if other countries do not believe they will be forced to acquire some, a small cost can be paid today compared to a potentially much larger cost in the years to come. So even if they don't believe in it, they should probably still move first to get the first mover advantage. As they said, wouldn't be surprised to see other sovereign nation states acquire Bitcoin in 2022. Now, the point here is gold, like what Russia's doing. Russia also is moving into cryptocurrencies. Nations like El Salvador are moving into Bitcoin. And the point is that the United States, and the banking system overall, Canada as well, is proving that if they decide they wake up tomorrow and they don't like you, or they don't like the nation that you're in, your money could be gone. That's what's happened in Afghanistan. That's what's happening in Canada. That's what's happened in the past. So we used to say that I would only invest money you can afford to lose. I might rather say today that I would only keep money in the banks that you could afford to lose. So that's what I would say right now. This is something definitely to keep an eye on. It's definitely something to think about with your money. Where are you keeping it? Where you store your wealth matters. Like I said, I am going to have a 1-hour presentation, a free presentation that you can come to. There's a link down below where I'm going to break down this tectonic plates that are smashing together, this cataclysmic event that's happening in the financial system, places that you should think about putting your money to grow it and to protect it. I'm going to do a live Q&A. There's a link down below if you want to join me. Otherwise, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you understand that where you store your wealth matters? And if so, where are you storing it? Leave me a comment down below. Of course, as always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, it's okay. Give me a thumbs down. But at least leave me a comment and at least let me know why. All right, that's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.